Gojo Satoru is the biggest scammer in Jujutsu Kaisen. With Infinity, his opponents throw everything they have at him, the hit just never arrives, and they burn all their energy to touch nothing. With the Six Eyes, he uses the strongest technique in the series while spending almost no energy, when anyone else would be drained in minutes. But Gojo's single biggest scam is worse than the worst scam centers in New Delhi. It's domain expansion. Every other sorcerer who opens a domain pays a brutal price for it. Gojo opens the most broken domain in the whole series, and he pays almost nothing. To see how big that scam really is, you first need to understand what a domain actually costs everyone else. Because domain expansion was never an ultimate move. It's a contact. There are 11 finished domains in this story, and once you know what each one charges its owner, you'll never watch these fights the same way again. Before we get to the famous ones, you need to understand what a domain actually is. Every sorcerer is born with an innate domain, the landscape that exists inside their own mind. When they expand it, they're using a huge amount of cursed energy to push that inner world out into reality, and a barrier seals the space shut with their technique built into the environment itself. So why would anyone expend so much energy on domain expansion? Because inside that space, their technique cannot miss. That guaranteed hit is what the user is really paying for. A domain doesn't give you more power, it gives you certainty. So what's the catch? There are three main costs to a domain expansion. The first one is energy. A domain drains a massive amount of cursed energy, more than almost anything else a sorcerer can do. The second is burnout. When the domain drops, the user's technique is completely burned out for a while, so they walk out of their own strongest move, unable to use the ability they built their whole fighting style around. And the third is a clash. If the opponent answers with a domain of their own, the two domains collide, and the more refined one wins outright. Keep those three costs in mind as we go, because you're about to watch 11 characters deal with them in 11 very different ways. So let's start somewhere strange, with a domain that breaks the rule we just learned. Megumi's Chimera Shadow Garden is technically unfinished, and it might still be the smartest domain in the series. When he expands it, liquid shadow floods the area, clones of him rise out of the dark, and his Shikigami gets stronger and multiply. But because he's never completed the domain, it's missing the one thing that defines a domain in the first place, the guaranteed hit. So what do you do with a domain that can't guarantee anything? You use it to break someone else's. On Dagon's beach, with 3 sorcerers about to die around him, Megumi expands his incomplete domain inside a finished one. A domain is a barrier claiming a piece of the world, and 2 barriers can't hold the same ground. So Dagon's domain starts to crack, and through that crack steps Toji Fushiguro. Megumi couldn't beat a special grade with power, so he broke the domain itself instead. The disaster curses are the honest version of the deal, because their domains do exactly what they look like. Jogo's Coffin of the Iron Mountain traps you inside an erupting volcano, where the heat itself is the sure hit. Simply being inside is the attack. He collided that domain with Gojo's Void once, and it taught him the rule every domain user only learns once. When 2 domains overlap, the more refined one wins, and his volcano stood no chance against Gojo's control. Dagon's horizon of the captivating Skanda looks peaceful by comparison. An endless tropical beach, but the sure hit is a flood of Shikigami that never stops firing, and the sheer volume is what kills you. But Mahito's self-embodiment of perfection is the scariest one here, because his sure hit is touch, and what it touches is your soul. Inside his domain, idle transfiguration lands automatically, and any body he reaches he can reshape like clay. It caught Yuji. But when he expanded it around Sukuna and touched that soul, the sure hit worked perfectly, and it was still the worst mistake of his life. Sukuna's soul was so vast that reshaping it did nothing, and all the touch accomplished was telling the King of Curses exactly where Mahito was standing. Sukuna took that as an insult, and from that moment Mahito was prey, so he spent the rest of the night running for his life. Then you get the humans who found the loopholes. Hikari's idle death gamble pulls you into a pachinko parlor, and the sure hit skips damage entirely. It just traps you in place and makes you watch him gamble. But when he hits the jackpot, the domain pays out infinite cursed energy for exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and that energy runs a reverse curse technique on a loop, healing every wound the moment it opens. For 251 straight seconds, Hikari is functionally immortal, and it was never really about power for him anyway. It's the rush. Higuruma's deadly sentencing is even stranger, because instead of attacking you, it puts you on trial. His puppet judge Judgment pulls the evidence of everything you've done straight into the courtroom, and you can't lie to it because it was never asking. The verdict is the real weapon. A guilty ruling can confiscate your cursed technique mid-fight, and a death penalty summons the executioner's sword, a blade that kills anything it cuts. And Higuruma built this domain about 100 days after learning that cursed energy exists, a move that took Gojo decades to perfect. And the lawyer got there in around 3 months. The late series domains take all of this somewhere darker. Naoya Zenin dies, comes back as a cursed spirit, and gains Time Cell Moon Palace, a pitch-black space where projection sorcery's 24 frames per second rule is enforced on every single cell of your body. Move without following his frame rate, and your own muscles tear themselves apart. Maki has to fight inside a domain where moving wrong shreds her from the inside. Kenjaku's womb profusion drops the barrier just like Sukuna's shrine, a tower of fused faces standing in open air, and its sure hit channels Uzumaki, an attack that compresses every curse Kenjaku has ever absorbed into a single blast. Yuki Tsukumo took it head-on and barely survived, and Yorozu's threefold affliction binds the sure hit to her own constructions, so the true sphere, a shape that destroys everything it touches, simply cannot miss. 3 very different monsters, and the same lesson every time. The contract doesn't care whether the signature is human. So how does anyone survive a room that's built to kill them? You don't overpower the domain, you cancel it. Simple domain, the new shadow-style technique that Kusakabe uses, creates a small neutral zone around the caster where the sure hit can't reach. Hollow Wicker Basket does the same thing for sorcerers who never learned that school's style. And domain amplification wraps your body in a thin layer of neutral domain that dissolves any technique it touches, including a guaranteed hit. But while it's active, your own technique is switched off too, because the fine print in this system never sleeps. That's why one grade 1 teacher with a katana can survive rooms where special grades die. Kusakabe has never expanded a domain in his life. He just understands the rules better than the people casting them. Nobody in this series punches their way out of a domain. They find the rule the owner forgot about. So the contract can be dodged, cancelled, even survived. But 2 sorcerers didn't get around it, they mastered it. Sukuna looked at the same rules as everyone else and decided to change them. Malevolent Shrine has no closed barrier, which should be impossible. He does it on purpose, through a binding vow, giving up the sealed walls in exchange for range that no closed domain could ever match. Cleave and Dismantle become the sure hit, and the effective range stretches out to nearly 200 meters. At that point, it isn't a room anymore, it's an entire district. And the shrine itself tells you something, because a domain is the user's inner world made real, and Sukuna's inner world is a demonic shrine sitting in the open air, slicing apart everything within 2 blocks of it on a timer. He even renegotiates the vow mid-fight against Gojo, narrowing the range in exchange for more power, adjusting the terms of his own domain while it's still running. Everyone else signs the contract as written. The King of Curses drafts his own. And yet, for all that control, there was still one sorcerer whose domain made even Sukuna's look expensive. That sorcerer is Gojo, and his domain is the one every other domain gets measured against. Gojo's unlimited void skips your body completely and goes straight for your mind. The sure hit floods your head with infinite information, everything at once with no filter, and your brain locks up completely trying to process it. So you just stand there, awake but unable to think, while Gojo decides what happens next. Shibuya is where you see how terrifying that really is. Gojo opens his domain inside a crowd for just 0.2 seconds, and in that instant, every bystander caught in range receives about 6 months worth of information. They collapse on the spot, and while the entire street is frozen, Gojo walks through and takes apart close to 1,000 transfigured humans by hand. For Gojo, the domain is a pause button. It freezes the room, and he handles the rest himself. But what about the costs we just talked about? This is where Gojo breaks the system, because the Six Eyes controls his cursed energy so precisely that the drain barely affects him, and the burnout that leaves other sorcerers helpless clears for him in seconds. That's why he can open the void multiple times in a single fight, something nobody else in the series can afford to do. Which leaves one last question. What happens when the domain that pays nothing finally meets the one that rewrote the rules? The answer is the one clash this whole series was building toward, and the more refined world won, exactly like the rules said it would. So line all 11 domains up and look at what each user actually paid. Gojo pays almost nothing, and that's exactly why nothing in his life feels like a real fight until Sukuna shows up. Sukuna trades away his walls to own the entire street. Megumi pays by giving up certainty. Hikari pays in odds. Higuruma pays in procedure. And Mahito paid with the one soul he should never have touched. Because that's what domain expansion really is. Every domain is a confession. The shape of the room tells you what its owner values. And the clause they gave up tells you what they were willing to live without. The strongest characters in Jujutsu Kaisen were never the ones with the biggest domains. They were the ones who knew exactly what their domain would cost them, and paid it without flinching.